It's Rylie.
It's Sloan.
It's Briar.
Hang on to your broomsticks.
It's about to get eerie.
Today's episode could contain themes and elements uncomfortable to some listeners. Please check the episode description and remember to always take care of yourself.
So today we're going to talk about a conspiracy, a little bit of a family story, a little bit of everything tied into one. So we'll just dive in and see where it leads us all. So this idea really came from Mom, because she was down there with our grandmother, who we call Mother, just for the listeners out there. So if we say Mother, it's really our grandmother. It's fine. It's a family thing.
It works for us.
It's a family thing. Mind your business. So Mother was telling him this story of when she was a little girl and one of her friends. And it was this girl that she was really close with. And she tells them that the communists came and took this little girl's mom away. So I'm like, what? That's interesting. Because she lived in Mont Eagle, Tennessee, which is like a little tiny town on top of a mountain, pretty much. And so the girl's name was Horton, and I did some digging, and there was this school called the Highlander Folk School, and when you Google it, this article pops up, and it calls it a communist school. So there again, I'm like, oh, I gotta do some digging. I gotta figure out what is with the communists coming and taking somebody's mama. And so when I did some digging, I found that school. The co-founder, it's not really a communist school.
To clarify.
It wasn't a communist school. And we'll dive into that and why they thought that and what was really going on. But the founder, his name was Miles Horton. And he was born July 9th, 1905. And he actually died in January of 1990. He had founded this school. He was a co-founder of the Highland Folk School. And he was actually a director until 1973. He was a teacher and a socialist. He had a lot of socialist beliefs, but he was huge in the civil rights movement. He was once referred to as the father of the civil rights movement by James Bevel, because in his school he taught lessons, which I'll talk about what they actually taught there, but he had taught Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks sat in on some of the lessons, John Lewis, James Bevel himself, and they were all kind of theirs when the civil rights were really popping around that time. And he was actually Karis Horton's father. So that was who Mother was friends with, was Karis Horton in school. And he married Zephilia Johnson in 1935. And that was Karis's mother. So they had two children. Karis and Thorsten was their other child. So at this school, the Highlander Folk School, it is actually still around. It's called the Highlander Research and Education Center. And it started in Mont Eagle, Tennessee in 1932. And it was really about all kinds of different social issues. And we'll talk about what they do now. They've kind of always been evolving and doing a little more stuff. But early on in the 1930s and 1940s, it was a lot of focus on organizing labor unions. So it was like right during the Great Depression, and Horton himself was always a huge advocate for workers and workers' rights. And even when he was younger, he was in his teens, and he worked in a tomato factory, he started a protest for higher wages for these workers in this factory. I think a lot of that comes from his parents, because his father was part of the Workers' Alliance, and so he kind of was in him. And plus, he was poor, and it's just one of those things they fought for. He went off to school on his own and made his way that way. So he focused this school, and what he focused on was that labor education and training laborers on unionizing and what it took to get that happening and fight for those rights. So then you get to the 1950s, that's when they kind of started focusing on some civil rights, and that became such a thing. So you can kind of see where some of those communist rumors are going to start coming in, because there was always drama between the Communist Party and the Socialist Party. And, in the 30s, that was a big thing. You're a commie, you're a socialist, you're blah, 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 blah. That's just part of history. So that's where they got a lot of that negative stuff. And that article was posted. It was like, it's a communist school. But it wasn't. They really did great stuff and fought for workers' rights. John Lewis talked about, he's a senator, and I could be wrong. It could be a congressman. I think he was a senator. Anyway, he talked about how he had his first integrated meal, so blacks and whites together at this school, because they all sat down and they just mixed the population. There was no segregation here, and they fought for those things. They fought to end those type of things. Rosa Parks, they say she was actually at a lecture there and was so inspired because there was Septima Clark and Miles Horton did a lesson together, and they were teaching and lecturing and, kind of, for lack of a better word, preaching to these people about the changes that need to happen. And that was shortly before what Rosa Parks famous were, the bus situation. So they say she was inspired by seeing a black man and a white man working together, talking about unity.
That's
that's really interesting.
That's what I thought. And then especially all that happened in a small little town, Monteagle, so that's
Tennessee.
Monteagle, Tennessee, back in the day.
Yeah.
So, but that was something that I thought was really neat, that these people, and Miles Horton, there was not a lot on him. You can read some of his writings and stuff, and they talk about him, but you don't know him as being a huge part of the civil rights, but he was associated with these people, and he worked and he supported them and really pushed for change with them, alongside them. So I thought that was really, really interesting. And so they even, they did a lot of workshops in 1953 about the public school desegregation. And that was before the, Brown versus the Board of Education, which is one of those big cases, because and you can see pictures, and there's actually a picture that was, I'm not sure where it was sent, it didn't say where it was sent, but you see on the back, there's like this big red stamp, and it says, like, leave our schools segregated, and they had sent it somewhere, and you can actually see Karis Horton in the picture dancing with somebody, and it's after a bunch of workshops and classes, and they were just black and white people hanging out, and they're just like having a good time dancing around. So that caused a huge stir, because back then that was that was not okay, but for them it was. It was okay, and that's what they were going to do, because they thought it should be that way everywhere. In 1957, they actually did a lot of work with establishing what they were calling Citizenship Schools, and it was to help teach black individuals who couldn't read the proper literacy skills and help them to secure their right to vote. So there's a lot of things that went into them being able to vote, and they had that right, but they weren't taking advantage of it because a little bit of not knowing how, those literacy skills that were so lacking in that time, because they hadn't been allowed to learn equal to white people. So I thought that was really awesome that was a program they established. And we'll talk about some of the end of the school as they knew it in Monteagle. But that program was actually something that was taken over by the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was led by Martin Luther King Jr. So when they started fighting the school, the Highlander folk school, originally in Monteagle, then they were like, okay, this program's too important. So Martin Luther King Jr.'s group took it over to continue it and continue helping these people to vote exercise their right to vote. So I thought that was pretty interesting. That he worked so... you can hear that he taught with Martin Luther King, and Martin Luther King Jr. said in on his things. But to know that they worked so close that they were like, this program's too good. You got to take this over. But it originated at the Highlander Folk School in Monteagle. It's pretty neat. So that document that I was telling you that says it's a communist school actually came out in 1957. And the Georgia Commission on Education released it. And the heading was Highlander Folk School, Communist Training School, Monteagle, Tennessee. So there was so much. The FBI has everything I look at seems to have FBI archives on it. They're going to be like, why is this girl on our site so much? And I'll be like, sorry, research. But I didn't even look through all of the stuff that the FBI has on the Highlander Folk School. Because so many people were writing letters and reporting to the FBI that this was like some big communist headquarter. You can read, there's letters, and I think I've got some stuff in there that we'll talk about. But there's so many. There's thousands of pages of stuff on the FBI archive about this school.
Because so many people wrote them.
Because so many people kept reporting it and writing them about it and telling them to investigate, and it was pretty wild. You can read letters that people wrote. Let me see if I've got one in here, and we might touch on it. But then they're just like, you've got to investigate. It's just a bunch of communists. I've never been, and I don't know anybody, and this isn't personal, but they're communist. They're
you need to investigate it. Go investigate.
They're just a bunch of communists. So and then Georgia Commission of Education releasing that article did not help. And on that, there's actually a picture of Karis Horton on that Communist Training School article. And it's her standing there with her dad, Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks. And there might be someone else in it, and then it's her. She's a little girl in it. Which is interesting, because that was one of Mother's friends.
I know.
She said it was always really nice to her, and they were close. So it's just an interesting tie, and it's an interesting story when you think of how much it links to such a huge movement, and these huge people who were in this little town, little old Monteagle. So after that, there was a lot of outrage and haters that after that article they just kept on with the Communist Training School, and it really stemmed from the idea of how much they're advocating for the working class and the poor people, and then the segregation laws is really what got people fired up. They were not a fan of that.
Yeah.
And so in 1962, it lost its charter and had its property confiscated. So the Highlander Folk School in Monteagle didn't exist. But they knew it was coming. So when they started fighting them on it, and before the final ruling, they already chartered a new institute called the Highland Research and Education Center, which is still there today. So but not Monteagle. They reorganized and moved to Knoxville, Tennessee in 1962. So that was after the state shut them down. They were like, all right, we're going to get shut down. This is too good to let it go. We got to fix this. So they moved to Knoxville, set it up, and like I said, that's still what it is today. It's the Highland Research and Education Center. But it didn't stay in Knoxville. It actually moved in 1972 to Newmarket, Tennessee, which is where it is today. It's still there. They still do stuff. And I've got a couple of things we'll look at. They have a great website, and you can see it's like a huge farm, and they do different gatherings and things. COVID's changed a lot of stuff on their website, because they talked about you could go and like do stuff, but they don't do tours anymore, or they haven't recently. Yeah. But it was still cool seeing the website of what originated as the Communist Training School. Yeah. But not really. So they were actually shut down because the violating of the segregation laws, but they really got them for selling alcohol. And it's really stupid, honestly. They lost their charter because they broke the rules of what the charter was. The FBI never found them to be doing anything shady. There was no communist training. It was not a communist headquarters. So the FBI came clean. And in the archives, you can see they've got like their policy, all their motto and all that stuff. The FBI never found anything dirty on them. They were legit. But they lost their charter because of, honestly, a crappy technicality. Because the selling alcohol was, they had a fridge and they would have beer and drinks in it. And you could put money on top. So if you took some, you could put money so they could go and buy more. You know, places do it nowadays. You put money in for drinks. They use it to buy more drinks if you take a drink.
Well, that's what at Lowe's outside in the garden center, they would have a fridge out and you would donate a couple quarters or change so they could buy Gatorades and stuff or more waters.
Yeah, so you would just, leave a little money, take one. Just, it's nothing. It wasn't a bar. It wasn't a speakeasy. It was just, at that time, you just grab a beer. It was adults there, They just had beer in there, and so they got them as
selling alcohol
because you would take a beer, they would leave money.
Yeah, so like a technicality.
Yep. So I was like, that is shady. So, a little more about this before we dive into the juicy conspiracy. The interesting part that I was like, oh, that's a conspiracy. That was their huge focus, was the civil rights and things. In the 1960s and the 1970s, they shifted a little bit of their focus again. They focused on a lot of Appalachian issues. So that's kind of why it's still in that area. So, still that same thing, help the poor, the working class, really helping with those. There was a lot of work with coal mines and worker health safety, environmental safety. So all those things that happened throughout the Appalachian area. And people still fight for those today, and it's still a huge issue. But they shifted their focus to that. And then in the 1990s, they expanded and were really working with and fighting for LGBT rights in the U.S. and even expanded internationally at that time in the 90s.
Dang.
Wow.
So it's a huge, like a social movement group. They've adjusted with the times and they've fought where they needed people to be.
Constantly expanding the horizons of what is needed.
Yeah. So, and moving around and still fighting for those same things. It wasn't a change of focus and like wishy-washy. They just kept adding things that needed some social reform, some social justice, some people
change.
Fighting for them. Yeah, just people to unite and fight for change in those areas. So I thought that was cool. I thought that was cool where you could see from just labor unions to civil rights all the way Appalachian issues, LGBT issues at that time. And still today. Like I said, they're still fighting on stuff today. And we'll get back to that, to the new stuff there at the end and give it a little special moment. But the conspiracy, of course, is that the communists came and took her mom away. That was still the part that like was in my mind. I was like, why did they say the communists came and took her away? Why would they think? Why would Mother be like that was the story?
We stuck a pin in that and did the research, and now we're back to it.
Yeah, so I found that cool stuff, but then I'm like, all right, back to the communists taking her mom. Because now I'm like, it could still be the communists, even though the Highlander school wasn't communist. I was still expecting communists. So, anyway, I digress. Zephilia Horton was Karis's mother. She was born in April of 1910, April 14th of 1910, and she died in April 11th of 1956. She was a musician. She was also a huge organizer of the same time, an educator, civil rights activist, and a folklorist. So she actually went to the school. She met him at the Highland Folk School when she went, and that's when she met Miles, and they met and fell in love, and, those things. She was actually from Spadra, Arkansas. I'm not sure if that's right, Spadra, which is a huge coal mining town. But she was not necessarily poor. Her dad was actually, he was over a mine at one point. I think he was the superintendent of a mine. And then he actually became the owner of the mine. And her mother was a teacher. So she on her own, and it wasn't just really a fluke, she was actually involved in the unionizing of the workers of her father's mine. And it was actually a huge deal because she helped them unionize against her father pretty much. So, and it was actually the Progressive Miners Union, and it was a Minister Claude C. Williams that really got her involved and really inspired her in helping those workers of her father's mine. So her father, of course, disapproved. There was actually talks of he disowned her, is what they said. But I read a couple things later on that talk about it wasn't as dramatic as a lot of stuff seem. Because I read one thing that said Miles Horton actually helped to reunite them briefly. So I think it was a bit of a mixture. I'm sure he was mad. He might have even disowned her briefly. But it wasn't a lifetime type thing.
Yeah.
So it was actually in 1935 when she attended a workshop at the Highlander Folk School. Shortly after that, a couple months, is when she married Miles. And so while she was there, she was the cultural director because she believed that music really helped in organizing. And that was her thing. She was classically trained and thought music could inspire everybody in situations. So she would have her students bring different folk songs or religious music and would actually turn them into protest songs. So it was songs that people would know, and she would change them around to be used in protests and things.
Huh.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. A big one was, it's called We Shall Overcome, and Pete Seeger is like really known for singing it. And that was like her adaptation. Because she actually heard it at a picket line for some tobacco workers who were on strike in South Carolina. And it was Lucille Simmons. She heard Lucille Simmons singing a version that she did, and it inspired her to change it and tweak it even more. You can actually go on YouTube and find her singing it. So, which is pretty cool. It's pretty neat. So, this is where it gets weird. And I will say, there's a bunch of people who talk about, I wish I could remember the lady that said it, but she did a lot of research on Zophilia and has written a book on her. And she had a quote, and she was like, it was always Miles, Miles, Miles. Talking about Miles Horton and getting a lot of the credit, and Zophilia kind of being overlooked. But she did a lot. She did a lot with music and drama in the school and organizing. And
well, yeah, if she caused a union against her own dad, then she was very passionate about what she was doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so she fought just as hard. She was there at that school putting in the work and effort and really fighting for things she believed in. So, anyway, back to the creepy, the weird. So she died in April 11th, 1956. Her cause of death was one of the weirdest things. So your mother is like, communists took her away. And I'm like, well, let me do a quick little Google. So you go to Wikipedia. And she died by accidentally drinking a glass of typewriter cleaning fluid. Yeah.
What?
I was like, oh, excuse me? What?
It's like an artist when they drink the paint water.
Yeah.
But she's like, typewriter fluid.
Yeah. So, it's deadly. Because, so I did there's not a whole lot of digging. I was like, I need to know, like, she just take a sip? Did she, a whole glass? Was it a bottle? How did she know? Why did you just have a glass of typewriting cleaning fluid right there? There's so many questions. But there's nothing.
How do you mistakenly drink it?
Right. So what it is, typewriter cleaning fluid is carbon tetrachloride is what was used. As at that time, that's what was used. That's still used on a lot of stuff today. So it's a colorless liquid, but it has a sweet smell.
Okay.
So I'm even curious if some things it made it seem like maybe it was subtle, But then other things I read is like, no, like it has a smell, like a pungently sweet smell.
Like antifreeze almost.
That's what I was kind of thinking. So I don't know. I don't have any carbon tetrachloride to give a little sniff to. But from reading, I was like, so I could see maybe the color wise. But as far as like smell wise, would you smell it before you took a sip?
What if did it say it was mixed with anything, or it was just a glass of?
It just said she accidentally drank it. Typewriter cleaning fluid. So, and then I was like, well, let's do a little more research into carbon tetrachloride. And see what I can find out, because you can't find out anything other than that's... And she died, it was in Nashville. She accidentally died from drinking it in Nashville. Which what it actually causes is acute kidney failure. And from uremic poisoning. I butchered that. But that's what it does when you drink it. It's used in fire extinguishers, other cleaning things. And it is actually, they've kind of reduced what they use it in because it's one of the most potent hepotoxins, which is, it's toxic to the liver. It pretty much destroys you. So then I found an article talking about, because I wanted to know how much does it take to kill you. So the little FBI agent that's like, why is this girl on our site, is also looking at the stuff I'm Googling, because I was like, how much of this to kill a person? I was like...
They're like, red flag, red flag, red flag.
And then I was like, does the government poison people with carbon tetrachloride? How much to kill someone? But I found some cases. There was an article, and it was different people who had ingested it and what happened to them. So, a 15-year-old male, he drank 30 milliliters, was discharged from the hospital after 15 days. So it made him sick, but he lived. A 14-year-old female, she ingested 10 to 20 milliliters, discharged after 10. And these people, and they were like, one of them, it was talking about, it was like in a water bottle. So these are like weird situations, which is just kind of, I don't know, it's just strange. But it seems like one of those weird accidents, maybe. So I was like, maybe. Then a 31-year-old male, he drank 50 milliliters, and he was discharged after 9 days. And then a 50-year-old woman who took one sip from a water, this is a bottle that had it in it, was discharged after 9 days. So I'm like, these people didn't die.
Yeah. And it seems like the older you are, the less you have to stay in the hospital, the more your body is like...
Yeah, and especially the 31-year-old male, he drank, that's a lot. The 50 milliliters was a lot compared to the other ones. There was more. These are just some of the ones I grabbed. And so one of the only ones that was, the person died, was a man. He was 36 years old, but he was like a severe alcoholic. He had ingested alcohol and that substance around the same time.
So that already means his liver was...
Yeah,
kaput.
And that's what it talks about a lot, was if you were an alcohol user or abuser, it hits you even harder. It's like notorious. So I was like, maybe that was the situation. So I tried looking to see if there was any sort of indication of if she was a drinker or anything, and you don't want to speculate about someone if they're unhappy in their life. I was like, was it maybe not an accident? But you really don't know.
Yeah.
And from what you read about, they loved what they did. They lived a simple life because they put all their effort into the work they did. So...
Yeah, but maybe they did like to drink. Not excessively, but they did get their building shut down because the selling of alcohol.
Right, so maybe she was just a normal drinker, and it just hit wrong when she accidentally ingested it. There's no indication of how much she drank of it. She took a big old swig. I don't know. Or if it was just mixed in something. So maybe it was diluted and she drank more. There was no more information on it other than...
That's just weird to me. Like, how do you accidentally drink it?
Yeah, to the point to where it kills you. And it was in Nashville, so I was like, well, maybe could she not get to the hospital? Everything is speculation at this point, because like I said, I couldn't find it. But I was like, maybe it made her sick and she just couldn't get to the hospital fast enough. And that's what happened, because it was in Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, oh, well, that was her disappearing. I'm like, or I didn't know when she left. They were still married. I didn't see anything about them being separated. They were married until she died. And he did remarry afterwards and then got divorced, I do believe. But there was no indication of why she left, except for she died in Nashville. So, and I think it was kind of close, maybe. But
so maybe Mother just got told that she got taken, but it was really she had died. So maybe to keep it under wraps from, like, I don't know.
So I don't know. That could just be one of those stories where the way rumors work in that area, and they were associated with that school.
Or Mother's saying she got taken out.
That's what I was still kind of under the impression of, like, does the government kill people using typewriter fluid?
But my thing also, like, because this is just weird, if it is a conspiracy and, like, if she did get taken out by somebody, why would they go after her and not the husband?
Right.
Around that time, though, I feel like it would have been a bigger stink for, like, I think it would have been looked into more if it was a man and, like, a woman. Especially because, like you said, the one woman who wrote about her was like, it's always miles, miles, miles. So if something happened like that was weird, they'd be like, oh, but where it was just her and she was a woman.
Yeah, and where she was so passionate. And also it could have been a warning to her husband.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, and that's why I tried finding if there was any indication of when she left Monteagle or, just anything on what happened. Because I didn't know. I was like, did it happen in Monteagle or did she vanish first? And then it was like, oh, she died. But that's why it's just so interesting having what Mother said and what Mother was like, no, this is what happened. This is what everybody said. This is what happened. And then it very well could still be what happened.
Yeah.
I really don't know.
Well, I mean, you have to think, too, because especially in small areas, small towns, people are going to know what really happened, whether police or media wants other people to know. Like, you're also going to have the fake stories and people who don't know what happened, but there's always an ounce of truth in the word that spreads around towns, because everybody knows each other. Everybody is around one another.
Right. And what if she did go missing? She could have went missing and then, oh no, she actually died. She died in Nashville. She accidentally drank some typewriter cleaning fluid. It just seems so wild. It's just interesting that even if that was a freak accident, it's so strange to know that there's a freak accident out there that you can find on a Wikipedia website and then have your grandmother be like, the communists came and got her.
And she was good friends with her kid.
With Karis. Karis Horton.
Yeah. Was
her friend. So I definitely thought it was interesting. It's still interesting. And even for Miles Horton and Zephylia herself to be so, so active in it, there wasn't a whole lot. There was a little bit, but, I mean, as far as, like, personal lives and stuff, there wasn't a whole lot of that because they put everything into these movements. And it honestly, it almost felt, when you look at the stuff, it felt like kind of selfless. There was obviously no doing it for notoriety because there wasn't a whole lot of that from either one of them. They weren't out there trying to shake hands with all these famous people. They were just trying to
make a difference,
and push this movement through.
And all those people just
and those people were coming there because they had open doors and were welcoming them and fighting for labor rights and civil rights and all these things and just pushing for that. So I thought it was interesting. So, like I said, it's a bit of a conspiracy because you don't know, and we got our little story. It could be nothing, but
you never know.
You never know. You never know. So, before that wraps up that part, just because I think the Highlanders Research and Education Center is so awesome, there was a few things I was going to kind of talk about, stuff they do now, just because it's pretty cool. So, on the Highlander Research and Education Center now, I'm just going to read some of the modern stuff that they do, because they're still doing a ton of stuff out there, and it's just really cool. So, on their website, their little motto is, I'm just going to read it straight from the website. It says, "We are a catalyst for grassroots organizing and movement building in Appalachia and the South. We work with people fighting for justice, equality, and sustainability, supporting their efforts to take collective action to shape their own destiny." I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
It was like inspiration. When I was on their website, I was like, man, I want to do stuff like that. So one of their things that I thought was really cool too, they have a lot of cultural organizing, which they talk about celebrating and honors people's spiritual traditions and cultural expression in the work to shift policies and practices. And a direct quote on there was, "Culture is rooted and present in each person, but has shared energy that can transfer, shift, or move people, power, and ideas." So that's one of the things they'll do. They'll do these big kind of gatherings, and people get together and celebrate their cultures and honor their cultures and things like that. So that was a big point with the culture. They also do a lot of economics and governances, and they have these things called solidarity squads, which are kind of in different places that they highlight on their website, and these groups that are doing really good. So Knoxville had two that they talked about. One is called SICK. It's Service Industry Coalition of Knoxville. And the other one was called The Bottom. And The Bottom was working a lot with Black community spaces and community housing, because that is still a problem. Housing is still a problem and things. SICK did a lot of stuff during COVID and a lot of organizing and aid for restaurant workers, because the pandemic hit, restaurant workers really hard.
Yeah.
When everything shut down. So there again, the Highlander is really working on modern issues and modern things. So they've already adapted and adjusted.
They moved with the times.
To pandemic, assistance. There is a group in Lexington, Kentucky, and it's LPD Accountability. They did a lot of work in demanding accountability and the no-knock warrant ban. That was a big deal. Another one in Lexington is the People's Blueprint, and theirs was about building the bridge to dismantle systemic and systematic racism in our community. So those are in Lexington, Kentucky. Mobile, Alabama has the Black Empowerment Team. They also did a lot of COVID work with public housing needs and food distribution, and really working to hold city officials accountable for how they're actually using the COVID relief money. And another one in Gadsden, Alabama, called RAIN, Race Against Injustice Now. They actually did these little pop-up free stores during the pandemic to help with clothing and supplies and food. And also have a youth program to help support individuals who are released from a jail that's right down there near it. And they do a lot of impoverished community outreach and stuff. Impoverished communities work and outreach. So those are all great groups on there too, and everybody should check those out. They also have, this was pretty cool because they work a lot with youth. It's called Seeds of Fire, and it's Southern and Appalachian youth-centered groups. They're youth-led, and they really work for social justice and change. They're like broke down into these little groups that are all about the methodologies of the Highland Center. So there's population education, cultural organizing, intergenerational organizing, language justice, participatory action research, land and place liberation. So each one of those has a group of young people who they lead it, and they're like the members. So it's very focused on the younger generations who are going to bring about the change now. And they also have one, and it's called Transformative Cohort, and it's supporting trans or gender variant young people across the South in their efforts. So what they do is these individuals who've already started things and are doing movements and trying to speak out, they're the whole point, I think, from this is to support them and to help.
Back them up.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Which is a huge thing in the South. So I thought that was really awesome.
Yeah.
So definitely recommend checking out some of these groups and what they're doing, just to even read about them and show support and see. So all that started from the communist training school. But not really. The Highlander Folk School was great, and it boomed into the Highlander Research and Education Center, which is still doing awesome stuff today. So I thought it was pretty neat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very neat.
Thanks for hanging out with us.
Until next time,
Remember, you can find us on
Our own website,
Facebook,
Instagram,
YouTube,
Twitter.
and even Pinterest.
links are in the description.
As always,
Stay weary.
stay leery.
And stay eerie.